So let's go ahead and get going. Welcome to the weekly Network Service Mesh meeting. This meeting happens every Tuesday from 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific time. It's preceded just before it by the PR issue weekly review meeting from 7:30 to 8 a.m. Pacific time. And we've got bridge details for those both here. We also, as a community, attend the CNCF the CNF working group meeting, which happens weekly Mondays at 1600 UTC. And we participate in the CNCF tag networking, which is the first and third Thursday of every month at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Wanted to draw everyone's attention to the upcoming KubeCon EU schedule, and particularly to this network service mesh talk that Jiang will be giving at the CNCF Telco Cloud Native Telco Day that's co-located at KubeCon EU on Network Service Mesh. We have coming up the Open Source Summit in Austin, Texas in June, and then strongly encourage folks to please submit talks to KubeCon North America that CFP is opening up. Anything else that folks are aware of in terms of events? All right, then. Moving right along then, we are blessed to have a wonderful social media team. We've added 4 new followers on Twitter. We are following 49 new folks, and there have been 11 tweets in the last week. All that's been reposted to LinkedIn, but apparently our community is much more of a Twitter community than a LinkedIn community. Moving on to the agenda, Network Service Mesh 1.3 was finally released last week on 4/14. We'll shortly have the release announcement on the website, and we'll make a big deal about it on Twitter. Quick check for those of you consuming downstream. Were you able to get 1.3, and how is that going for you?
Sultan, you were able to try it out, right?
Yes, and well, the MTU issue is no longer present, so that's definitely a plus. Otherwise, I haven't seen any issues.
Excellent. The only issues being old issues that are no longer present is always a good report. And I know that there were some things that reported about scanning of images, but there seems to be some confusion because the things are reported in scanning the images we can't find in the images. So I think Robert is going back and having them rerun the scans. Anything else on 1.3 folks would like to discuss before we move on? All right, moving on to NSM 1.4's release schedule. So we discussed this a few weeks running, and so definitely if folks have new observations they'd like to make, there was a desire to run a shortened NSM 1.4 release this time, currently with a scheduled release date of May 30th. So just wanted to check in with folks and see if everyone is still feeling okay about this.
Looks good here.
Cool. And then I don't know if we had concluded or had ongoing this conversation about what we need to do to consider more frequent releases post 1.4. And I think there was a general consensus that moving some of the things that are done in CI just before the release into being part of the ongoing release. 24-hour runs were definitely longer runs. There does a challenge. The GitHub run max is 6 hours. Profiling for memory and CPU leaks was also suggested. Upgrade testing was suggested. Are there other things that have come to mind for folks here?
Okay.
I think, were you the one, Denise?
Just a short
okay.
question, Ed. Sorry,
Yes.
just a short
Oh,
question,
please go ahead.
to this point. These profiling and upgrade testing, will it be a part of the integration tests or completely separate one?
That's not entirely clear to me. I think, Denise, you're the one who suggested profiling for memory and CPU leaks. Was that mostly on longer runs?
I guess we can run it for long testing and for integration testing as well.
It's probably more
I
interesting for
guess
long testing, is my guess.
I guess we can start with both testing.
Yeah, so profiling is probably more interesting for long testing, would be my guess, because most of the things we've run into where we've had some issues that we've tracked down, we've uncovered them in longer testing. And I know that you were sort of doing this by hand, Denise, when we were running the long tests from before the release, just to determine that we were basically, relatively close to our original, that we sort of quiesced to a steady state for CPU and memory. I don't know, did that answer your question at all, Sislard?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to introduce it firstly for the long testing. I think the memory leaks and CPU leaks will come up at that test because if it would come during the integration test, that would be a very fast leak. So I think these are for long testing. I think so.
We have one thing that our integration tests are running on the one instance of manager and one instance of forwarder for each tests. So probably profiling makes sense for them.
Okay.
So we are running a suite of tests on one instance of manager and forwarder. So
okay.
And
so
also our tests are running on 1 hour. So probably we can track some issues with
the other thing we have to be very careful about though is that our current integration tests are being used as examples for people trying network service mesh, and obviously you don't want to necessarily, well, you probably don't want to be running profiling in production, is my guess.
Currently we have two versions of images. We have images for CI testing and we have images for release. And probably we can include profiling only for CI images.
Okay. So something to think about. I know we're a little bit abbreviated right now for the 1.4 release, so I'm not sure how much of this will necessarily get done for the 1.4 release. We'll sort of have to see how things go in terms of space. But if there are folks interested in working on this, definitely moving in this direction would be interesting. Okay, and then you, Denise, had also brought up, I think, the possibility of auto-generating release notes, and I think I saw like a trial run of some of this going on. Am I remember that correctly?
I also thought about things that we probably can add note that look at nodes at site, in the same site, and just redirect all guys from GitHub release notes to NSM site release notes. Can it help?
Well, maybe. It depends on the quality of what's being generated by the GitHub release notes. I think right now they're still reporting all of the NSM bot auto merges, correct?
Yep, I think we need to look at this.
Okay. We have the Spire issue we're continuing to keep an eye on as well. That's still open, but hopefully will be fixed before 1.4. If I recall correctly, we determined that this was not a critical fix, but it was definitely something we'd like to see fixed. Is that correct, Sislard? I think you're the one who reported it.
Yes, correct. And as I've seen, there is already a pull request that is scheduled for Spire 1.3 that will be before our release.
Excellent. That's good. So we just need to keep an eye on it so we can make sure to pick it up.
Sure.
Excellent. Anything else on that before we move on?
Now we can move on.
Cool. So Lionel, I know that you had some things you were looking to fix on IP and policy removal on connection update.
There's still some follow-up for this, for the routes in the policies that cannot be updated. And there's also the IP routes themselves that cannot be updated when we request a second time the connection NSN. So
Okay.
yeah, this has to be fixed.
Okay, and is this something you're working on?
I haven't started yet, but yeah, I will. Not sure if I will have time before 1.4, but yeah, I will try to.
Okay, excellent. All right, anything else on that before we move on?
No.
So then, do we have, let's see, this was actually being worked by Laszlo. Do we have Laszlo here today? I vaguely recall that he's on PTO this week. Does that match anyone else's recollections?
I think he's on vacation, but we had a discussion on this. He's still working on the OS images to have just one.
Okay.
But,
No, I noticed that there was
it's on track right now.
Yeah, I noticed that there was a PR, an issue open for it, and then also that there was some work moving forward on the OVS testing, getting the OVS test to run automatically in CI. But we can follow up with that next week when, actually, do we know when? I keep forgetting that in Europe, you actually take more civilized vacations that last more than a week sometimes. Do we expect Laszlo to be back next week?
Yes.
Okay,
He
awesome.
will
So
be back tomorrow already.
oh, that's fantastic.
So I think we will have news for the next meeting. Yeah.
Cool. And then automatic update of Spire versions and Docker files. So
yeah,
this one is new.
From me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I added that one because, as I said, we had a discussion with Laszlo when it was on the to have only one OBS forwarder image, and found that the Spire version is quite old in the Docker file. So that's why I brought it up. Is there any kind of automation that has to update the Spire server and other versions in the Docker file? Because it was really an old one.
In which Docker file?
There was a file Laszlo used from the OBS. I cannot recall which one. Of course, we can add it to an issue if needed, but I will recheck it. And
we definitely want to go take a look at that. My recollection is, okay, so my guess as to where this is actually coming from is that I know that in the VPP forwarder, and I think in a few of the other Docker files, an OVS Docker file would be like this. There is a Spire version that's included for the purposes of testing. So you can run a Docker test with just the Docker itself. That's not actually included in the runtime Docker file, Docker image that you actually run. It's just used to run your local tests. And so definitely getting that updated in the small number of containers where we actually have it is probably a really good idea. But I don't think it's actually shipping in those Docker containers. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I actually had this conversation this morning with Richard around some of the issues with the things that were showing up in the scanning, which apparently there's confusion because they don't appear to actually exist in the Docker images. So he's rerunning the scanning. But I tend to view the world in sort of two phases. The first one is, do we have a real problem, right? Because those often require urgent action, right? Like if we were shipping a really ancient Spire version, that might be a real problem. And then the second one is hygiene. And the way you avoid having real problems is by having good hygiene. And so I'm a huge proponent of keeping things up to date as a matter of hygiene. And so when I ask these questions, what I'm really trying to get to the bottom of is, okay, do we have a real problem, or is this something where we should just have better hygiene? And I think that this is a better hygiene situation, which I'd be highly in favor of figuring out a way to improve. But I don't think it's a real problem. Does that make sense?
Yes, we will double check it with Laszlo and come back with the information.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that probably the only places we have these set up this way is probably in the command forwarder VPP and command forwarder ODS, because it is handy at times to be able to run simple Docker testing of those. Okay. But no, thank you for bringing it to our attention, because again, really ancient things, if they're not real problems now, they can become real problems in the future. And so it's important to keep an eye on them and keep them up to date. Anything else that folks need to talk about would like to talk about in this meeting? Otherwise, I'm inclined to yield back the time.
Just a short from my side again. Recently, I was working on a proper database configuration for Spire server in our tests, and or at least have one that is closer to production environment, because the one used in NSM uses memory database. So I've derived database configuration from the Helm chart used by Spire communities examples, which is really production grade configuration, and tried to use it for the healing tests. But for those tests that I'm just working on right now, I'm trying to add Spire server related healing tests when Spire server restarted, agent restarted, and both agent and server is restarted. And as I see, it doesn't really make a difference, because these are very simple test cases. But in the meantime, I found that one time when, as far as I recall, Richard brought it up, if there is any kind of test when the pod or container restarts are checked, why I bring it up, because I created such a test in these test cases I'm working on, and with that we would really found earlier the Spire related issues because of a Spire server restart. And does it make sense if I add these healing test cases and also with this pod restart check?
So let me make sure I understand this correctly, because there's a place in there where I think I may have gotten a little bit lost. So you're running basically Spire healing cases where effectively you're upgrading to a more productionist Spire, and you're restarting the Spire servers and the Spire agents just to make sure that if those come and go, that everything reconverges properly, correct?
Yes, it's quite similar to the existing healing test cases. Yes.
Oh no, and I'm extremely happy with this, and in fact, I would be delighted to see us have a more production, ready. Yeah. So anyway, so you're doing that. In the process of this, what was the issue that you came across? I got lost about that place.
I just said that if there is a check in my tests when I check if there was any kind of pod restart during the test case, I mean, in the end of the test, I check the restart count of the pods. And
Okay,
if
so
there was restart, then the test case is failing, or I would like to have it like this.
okay. So basically, I think what you're saying is that if you restart the Spire server or you restart the Spire agent, and any of the
Yes.
other pods in the system have restarted as a result,
Definitely.
that I would be very interested in seeing as a healing case. Yes, because I agree with you.
Okay.
We shouldn't have a case where the Spire server agent restarting causes, it shouldn't be the case that causes a restart in the existing pods in the system. And if I recall correctly, what you said is that you did not actually see that happening currently in your tests, but in the past we have caught issues with spontaneously arising situations like this.
Yes, definitely. The Spire server restart case would have been caught with this kind of test earlier.
No, I would very much love to see these kinds of tests in healing, because again, it just gets to the basic resiliency of the system. I'm generally the opinion that a big part of what it means to be a resilient cloud native system is that anything and everything can restart at any given moment, and the system rapidly reconverges to functioning. Right? That's what it means to be resilient. Is that it's sort of like we're all internet people here, right? And I often joke with friends of mine who are not actually networking people, especially people who are technical but not networking people, that the internet is a shambling mound of fail, that the internet is failing millions of times a second globally, but the system was designed to be resilient to being in a constant state of failure systemically. So in spite of the fact that there are millions of failures every second in the internet, your web browser still works, right? And that's the kind of stuff that I actually, that's kind of what I'm aspiring to on this side is, have it all fail as long as it all comes back pretty quickly, without further disturbing the system. So I like that idea very much.
Okay. So I'm working on this, and I will bring it up when I'm ready with this.
All right, cool, excellent.
And also, as I said, the production grade database configuration for Spire server is I don't see really that it will make any difference for our integration test, but it would be good to have it somewhere stored on GitHub under NSM for the users to be able to see such kind of configuration in the examples.
Or even just a pointer because the nice thing about the fact that we compile our Docker tests is even if we just have some documentation in the Spire page that says, look, the deployment here is a very simple toy deployment of Spire, just meant so that you can kick the tires on network service mesh. If you'd like to actually see how to do a production Spire deployment, go over here to some other place that we could link to and point them to where to try a production Spire deployment. Even something as simple as that would be useful.
That's good, I think, in the documentation. But if someone would like to test it and easily test it, it's better to have this configuration, because my configuration is prepared for NSM directly, so it's exchangeable with the current database configuration.
Oh, okay.
Very easily. So that's why I think. Okay.
We would rather have. I mean, my guess is we'd rather have a more production ready, example in our Spire example if you're interested in doing that, because quite frankly, my guess is we probably just did the memory-based database because it was quick and easy to do, and we just needed something that worked. Having a more resilient version is a perfectly good idea in my mind.
Okay, I think first of all, I will store it somewhere, and we'll do more tests with that. If it really makes any difference in our integration tests, if so, then I will bring it up. here in the meetings, and we can talk about to use it, not in each and every examples, but maybe in some examples.
Yep. Cool. No, thank you for bringing that up.
Okay.
That's actually really good. Cool. Anything else that folks would like to discuss in this call before we conclude?
Oh, Ed, I got questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
At first, are we planning to migrate SRv6 remote mechanism for forwarder VPP?
I would like to at some point. I don't think it's a high priority item right now, unless there is somebody who has a standing interest. Are you aware of someone who is wanting to use that feature currently?
Oh, no, but I think it probably could be used for VO3 stuff as a remote mechanism for VO3 network.
Interesting. No, that's one interesting possibility there. The other thing that I think has also come up with network service mesh recently that might be interesting, probably not for 1.4, but possibly as a follow-up, is it's been brought to my attention that VPP now has support for IKE v2 for IPsec, which means we could probably use IPsec as a vWire mechanism for as a remote mechanism. I don't know if anyone has direct and immediate interest in that. If that's something that might be interesting to the folks at Ericsson, for example.
From my side, it sounds super interesting to implement.
Yeah, it's the interesting thing with I tend to, it's a from pure technological matter, I personally tend to like WireGuard as a technology better than IPsec. However, there are regulatory environments in which the algorithms that are used by IPsec meet certain regulatory requirements that the algorithms used in WireGuard do not. So it might be interesting at some point in the future.
And also one question is related to forwarder kernel. As I know, one of NSM trends, it's start to work in non-Kubernetes systems. And can the forwarder kernel help with it?
Yeah, in fact, actually, that was part of the discussion I was having with Artem. Is I've been thinking, basically in terms of just bringing along the server side of of forwarder kernel, and then just having a client connect, because my guess is you can just completely reuse the existing chain elements without having to write new ones, if you do it that way. But that's an ongoing conversation, I think, that Artem and I are having on the monolith side. Does that make sense?
Yep, I think we can discuss it with Artem.
Cool.
And also, I found an extreme NSM case for interdomain. For example, we can register in floating registry an endpoint that implements network services from different domains.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I can absolutely see that potentially.
Yep, and as you know, currently we are not support this case. It's not supported yet, but I guess it probably we need to consider this case. Do you have any expectation about how NSM should handle the endpoint that supports network services from different domains?
Well, I mean, in my mind, essentially what that ends up looking like is you end up registering multiple network services, each of which happens to live in a different domain. And then you simply need to be able to, I think the real issue is you need to be able to properly handle incoming requests for different network services that happen to be coming for different network service domains. So I don't think the interdomainness of it necessarily makes it any different than any other multi network service case for an NSC. But maybe I'm missing something that you're seeing. You often catch details that I miss.
I also found that we need also register endpoint in each domain with network service. So, for example, if our endpoint is implements two network services, one from the local cluster and the second from remote cluster, in this case, the endpoint can be registered only in floating registry. And if client went to get local service, then NSM can not found the endpoint because it's
yeah. You definitely. I tend to think of it as just registering two network services, because it is two network services. So yes, you would need to register both network services.
So one of solutions here, we can just register an endpoint for each domain, and probably it will work.
Yeah. And the thing is, again, because network services in two different domains are distinct network services, right? It's not the same network service. Network services are scoped to the domain in which they live. So if you're actually providing two network services, you need to register an endpoint for each network service. Whether they're in different domains or not is sort of a relatively small detail. So, all right, cool. Anything else today before we conclude?
Yes, great work on the release.
Oh, and thank you all. You found a lot of stuff. I think the community in general is getting better and better at the process. So, all right, talk to you later.